Tenet, a good movie. Not great, but good. I offer a deeper written. I do this for all my reviews. I have a deeper written review for IMDb that I'll link down in the description. There will be spoilers, so from the get go. So be prepared for that if you haven't seen this yet. If you want to see a good movie, it's at least that. I had a hard time deciding on how to do this. It's a polarizing film in some ways. On the one hand, I want to give a review that's helpful to others. Decide whether you want to spend money on watching this movie or not. And hopefully contribute to a conversation about it. On the other hand, what do you say what you like about a movie? You know what I mean? And just throw that out there. In the end, I decided just to be true to myself. And I have great bias in favor of Christopher Nolan. And so I want to let you know that up front. So I gave the movie 3 out of 5 stars. On IMDb, I gave it 6 out of 10. And I felt that for even if you're a Nolan fan, you should heed that warning a little bit. And I'll get into that here in a moment. So, in the beginning of the film, I'm not talking about the theater, I'm talking about in the train yard. You have 2 trains going in opposite directions with the protagonist in the center, and he's attempting to take a silver suicide pill. Now, Nolan knows a lot about literature. In fact, I think might have a degree in literature. And he understands the concept of parallelism. It's the idea that telling part of a story that parallels another part of the story. And that's what's going on here. You have 2 trains in motion going in opposite directions. That's opposite entropy. And the protagonist is fighting in the middle, okay, is basically willing to give up his life in the middle of these 2 situations. Now, this is also irony because it's parallelism with 2 perpendicular elements going against each other, which is what Tenet is about. It is not, normally I don't watch anyone else's analysis of a movie. That way I just offer mine, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and if I'm right, I'm right. If there's things I missed them, warts and all. But you get kind of an unadulterated version of what I think about the movie. In this case, I went down the YouTube rabbit hole one day and came across some philosophers talking about Tenet. And that unfortunately kind of soiled some of that for me a little bit. But I'm glad I did it. It was interesting. I wish I could put a link to them talking about it under here. I don't remember where that was. I'm sure I could find it, I guess. I mean, it was just one of those days where you're just going through, finding tons of different videos and watching them. But it focused in on entropy, and that was very helpful. Because what is happening is, the way you should understand the timeline is from the perspective of the protagonist. His timeline is always going forward, always, in a linear fashion. So as long as the audience is following him, they're following a linear forward timeline. Okay, now if you know anything about this, you might think I'm wrong, but I'm not. Just hang in there. So it begins in the red entropy, okay? When he gets these bullets that are going in reverse, right? That is entropy going in reverse. Okay, this is a hint about what's getting ready to happen. Nolan does a really good job of masking exposition, using exposition to mask something else. He's saying that this character is going to become like these bullets. It's brilliant. So now, there's a funny scene, not funny to me, maybe not funny to anyone else, where she says, well, she puts the bullets on the table and goes to drop them, and they flop into her hand, and that reverses the entropy. And she says you have to intend to do it. Anyone who's at my age knows what Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is. And there's some scenes towards the end where to save time, they intend to go into the past to put something where they need it, and it ends up there, even though they don't really go there. And it's kind of like that. It's like, it's a little bit cringy, but it's fine. It's most people, I don't think we catch that. So this basically is a hint. This is how he tells stories and does such a good job doing it. Now, so we're going to call this portion the red entropy, and it's moving. The timeline is moving along, and then they get to the first turnstile. When they get to the first turnstile, he goes through it to save the girl, and that goes in reverse entropy. His timeline, though, is still going forward. And you have to understand that. It's very important you understand that we want to focus on his timeline and leave the blue entropy as entropy, even though it's also a timeline. And the reason why it's important, he does see himself, right, in the red world. But he's in the red entropy, but he's in the blue entropy. So there's definitely two timelines here. But it's really one timeline going forward. And if you think about a turnstile, it's going forward in the turnstile and just still going forward until you get to the second turnstile. And when that happens, he ends up earlier than where we were at the beginning, right? So he starts learning some things about the future. And so the whole time we're concerned about this future, who's sending these things into the past. And the entire time you think it's this arms dealer. Well, it turns out it's the protagonist himself. What Tenet is actually about is it is a temporal pincer move developed by the protagonist. That is what the movie is about. From the beginning to the end, he was in control. He was setting things up. He was setting things in motion to do this. Now, I don't think, and this is just my confusion, I'm sure, I don't believe he was responsible for sending the bullets back. It was just that he manipulated things that would happen that way so that he could control what ends up happening. And he deliberately even left himself in the dark several times to accomplish this goal. Really well done, really interesting. And I think now, but then it leads to a question. How good is this movie? Well, the thing is this. There's something really interesting. No one came across a problem with this narrative. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you about this. This is really interesting. Basically, he wants to keep you in the dark about who the protagonist is dealing with in the future. Who is it that's sending the stuff back? Who is it that he has to deal with? Great plot twist dealing with all that stuff in the future. And for good reason, he keeps all that a mystery, but it comes at a cost. It's a hefty cost. And I think he's aware of it. The cost is tension. If I don't know how the world's going to end, what do you want me to do about it? I can't do anything about it. And I remember as I was watching, I got halfway through it and I thought about nuclear proliferation. That at the fall of the Soviet Union, you kept hearing on the news, if you didn't live through the Cold War, it might be harder for you to grasp this, but we'd spent so much time worried about nuclear war. After all that, it was like, oh, well, now you have to be worried about nuclear proliferation, that these nukes could end up anywhere. And it's one of those things that was like, you know what? I didn't worry about it. When it was just the Soviet Union and their nukes and they controlled them, you were worried about them, right? When it was anyone could have them, it's kind of like you just couldn't, it just washed over you because I can't know where that's coming from. This is actually mentioned in Tenet, which is really interesting. But I was thinking about that. I was like, I can't stress out over this. I can't stress out over it because I have no idea where this could come from. So I think Nolan tried to fix this a little bit, and he fixed it with the sound effects and the music. And these things are great, okay? They're really well done. The music score is awesome. The sound effects are great. But all of these things come together to make Tenet a very stressful film to watch. And I sort of put it this way. It's kind of like someone took pages of a comic book, put them on different uh, cars on a train, and you have to read the comic as it's going past you. You're just really trying to focus and keep up with what's going on, and you just can't do it. Meanwhile, all this stressful music and sound effects are going on, and it's kind of a movie that wears on you as you're watching it. In fact, even though I liked the movie, I really didn't want to watch it again because I just remember going, okay, this is some really heavy stuff going on. Turns out I had a lot more fun thinking about it than I did actually, watching the movie. Um, Now, there's one last thing I want to talk about. Nolan has addressed the fact that his movies have gotten a little sloppy. If you look at Inception, he sacrificed the tightness of the narrative to offer a more entertaining story. He did the same thing in Dark Knight Rises. He said he's fully aware of the plot holes and problems with these movies. He wanted to give the audience an experience. Tenet, I think, is a very tight film, although I have a question about it. And again, I'm going to close with this. He brings up the grandfather paradox, which is if you went back in time and killed your grandfather, what would happen in the future? The paradox is you wouldn't have existed to begin with, but there you are going back in the past to deal with it. And he just says it's a paradox, it's a question that can't be answered. Fair enough, but then he brings up parallel timelines. Now, we had already seen that things were being sent into the present from the future, which, again, as I said, you don't want to entirely think about it that way. You want to think about it as reverse entropy, but whatever. I think this demonstrates that it is not a parallel timeline because things are coming back in their timeline, you see? So one of the theories is that every time you would travel back in time, you would travel in a different timeline. It's not even a theory, it's science fiction, but you get the point. By the way, the grandfather paradox, I have some issues with that because reverse time travel is a paradox. So the grandfather paradox, you can't even ask that question until you answer the reverse time travel question. That's even just going back in time is a paradox. So, but to finish the point, I think that could be one plot hole in this movie, in that it kind of affirms the notion of another timeline, and that can't be. And if it is the case, he would have to explain it, which he didn't do. Okay. Anyway, I do think if you like Nolan movies, you should definitely see it. If you want to be just entertained, I'd probably stay away from it, actually, even though I gave it 3 stars. It's a stressful film to watch. If you're on the fence, you're not sure, you should watch it then.